On Saturday's podcast, I talked about the options that the Minnesota Vikings have at the quarterback position if they determine that Kirk Cousins is no longer the answer for the franchise after next season. And when I posted that, particularly on Facebook, not too many people were thrilled about it. It was almost as if they thought that I was going out of my way to trash Kirk Cousins or looking for any reason for this dude to be gone. Oh, how could you bash Kirk Cousins? He had one of the worst offensive lines in the league last year. Do you not remember that? Yeah, we've talked about that at length already. This isn't new information. He had no running game to support him whatsoever. In fact, they had to rely too much on the passing game because of the putrid running game on the field, or they didn't run the ball enough. Okay, yep, well aware of that. He had a buffoon of an offensive coordinator in John DeFilippo, which led him getting fired mid-season. Do you not remember that? Yes, we already know this. We all know this information. We've talked about all this stuff time and time again. Folks, I'm not bashing Kirk Cousins. In fact, it was about 2 weeks ago, I did a whole podcast supporting Kirk Cousins and talked about how stupid it was for all the critics out there that pinpointed Kirk Cousins as the main culprit for the struggles in 2018. I wrote a whole article on the Viking Age defending this man's honor, okay? Apparently, I wasn't clear enough, but let me say it again, okay? I believe this team will be great. I believe that the Vikings will be one of the best teams in the NFC. I believe that this team will legitimately compete for the Lombardi Trophy with Kirk Cousins as their quarterback. However, if this offense struggles, if the offense is underwhelming, if they're anything like they were last year in 2018, the 20th ranked offense in the league, if they're anything similar to that, considering everything that the Vikings did this offseason to boost up the supporting cast around Kirk Cousins, if it's anything like that at all again, then the Vikings, folks, you can think this is clickbait all you want to. The Vikings will consider all options on the table, including possibly making a change at the quarterback position. And one of the hot topics that's been trending the last week or so, and I even mentioned this on my podcast on Saturday, is that a possible trade. And one of the things that I forgot to mention at all was the no trade clause. So we'll be sure to talk about that in just a hot second. I was going to talk about it on Saturday, but for everybody out there that's thinking about doing a podcast, one of the things that you'll learn about this is that you'll take your notes, you'll have all your pinpoints down, your bullet points, and say, okay, point A to point B leads to point C. I need to paint the whole picture to put together a story that everyone can stick with to stay along on the podcast and that they can get what it is that I'm trying to say. Sometimes when you get into the groove, you forget some of the things that you were supposed to talk about. You're just getting into it. And it's like after you're done, you're saying, oh, man, I forgot to talk about that, so we'll talk about that in just a second. But there's 3 teams that I'm looking at as possible suitors in a Kirk Cousins trade in 2020. Number 1, I'm looking at the Tennessee Titans. Marcus Mariota, he's on his 5th-year option in 2019. The last 2 years have been a disaster. He had a promising start right out the gate. He threw 4 touchdowns in his first game. I don't know if he threw for 4 touchdowns. He scored 4 touchdowns. I don't know if it was a combination of pass and running touchdowns, but he scored 4 touchdowns in his first game. If I'm not mistaken, that was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, his first game of his rookie season against Jameis Winston. So they went, if I'm not mistaken, 1-2 in the draft or whatever it was. But anyway, he had a hot start, and then the last 2 years have been a bit of a disaster for Marcus Mariota. Albeit the last year, 2018, he had, I believe, 42 sacks, so not great, but if this season 2019 continues the way it has been the last 2 years, they may want to make a change. The Titans, they may want to make a change at the quarterback spot. So that's the first team. I'm also looking at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals are interesting because they've always had, in recent memory, a loaded, talented roster, but they've never been able to put together at least even one playoff win under former head coach Marvin Lewis. So for Andy Dalton's career, you could always pinpoint at Marvin Lewis as the culprit for their struggles. Now, with Marvin Lewis gone, if Andy Dalton is still the same Andy Dalton that we've come to know, a stat pattern, not that great, never really can perform when the lights are bright. I know people say that about Kirk Cousins, but Andy Dalton, he's in the same way. If he's doing that again without Marvin Lewis to blame this time, they may want to make a change at the quarterback position too. And number 3, I'm looking at the Denver Broncos. You got to remember, when Peyton Manning retired and when Brock Osweiler, when he left and he joined the Houston Texans, it was supposed to be Trevor Siemian to take the torch. He was a disaster. Then it was supposed to be Paxton Lynch. He was no better. Then it was supposed to be Case Keenum. They signed Case Keenum after he left the Minnesota Vikings on a 2-year deal. After just 1 year, they traded him away to the Washington Redskins. I know that they traded for Joe Flacco, who got replaced by Lamar Jackson, so that tells you something. He needs to improve as a thrower of the football. I know he just finished his rookie year, but I've always had questions about Lamar Jackson as a quarterback anyway. They traded for Joe Flacco, but he's had struggles, got replaced by Lamar Jackson. I know that they drafted Drew Lock, quarterback out of Missouri in the second round out of this past draft, but he's had issues with accuracy as well. So the quarterback position in Denver is still up in flux. They've been playing the quarterback carousel game for the last couple of years. So those are the 3 teams that I'm looking at as possible suitors in a Kirk Cousins trade for 2020. Now is the no trade clause, the elephant in the room. Certainly Kirk Cousins, he has the power to decide whether he wants to waive or decline, or waive or not waive his no trade clause in his contract. And certainly if he decides to waive it or decides not to waive it, there's nothing that the Vikings can do. However, here is a way around that to force a trade or force Kirk Cousins to waive his no trade clause. And I'm only saying this because it's the NFL and they've shown a pattern of not giving a damn about their players. They have consistently treated their players like garbage. So I'm only saying this because this is a realistic possibility that the Vikings would do. And this would be behind closed doors. They would never come out in public and say this. When it comes to free agency, it's all about marketability. What have you done lately for me? Last year, these are the stats that I put up. This is my team's record and all that fun stuff. And that's absolutely fantastic. If I'm the Minnesota Vikings and I go up to Kirk Cousins and I say, listen, you're not in our future plans. We're going to draft a quarterback in the future. We would like to trade you to one of these 3 teams. What do you think? And if he says no, okay, fine. Here's what we're going to do. In 2020, Kirk Cousins, you're going to ride the pine. We are now going to introduce to you, all of Vikings Nation out there, our starting quarterback for 2020, Kyle Sloter, or hell, whatever quarterback that you can find out there, whatever bum quarterback. I think Kyle Sloter is nice. I think he could be good. I wouldn't be surprised if he was to take off and have a great career if he got the opportunity. Speaking of which, he should be the quarterback 2. There shouldn't be controversy for the quarterback 2 position. But anyway, bench Kirk Cousins for 2020 and put whatever quarterback out there that's unproven, has no experience, and tank the season away. That way, Kirk Cousins, you can still go out there and get whoever it is that you want in the draft. I'll talk about who it is in a second. Those that watch the Saturdays podcast, you already know what I'm about to say. But what that does for Kirk Cousins is, if you don't waive your no trade clause, we will bench you. And when you go into free agency that following season, all the teams are already looking at you with a different eye. Everyone's criticizing you that you can't win the big games. You got to the Minnesota Vikings and you couldn't win. Again, this is assuming that in 2019, the offense is still something around the 20th ranked offense in the league like it was in 2018. But with Kirk Cousins, teams are already criticizing you already. You can't win in the big games. And suddenly, you're going into free agency after riding the pine, after being benched the entire season. What looks better for you, Kirk Cousins, and your agent and your portfolio that you can present to the other 31 teams in the league in free agency? Here are the stats that I put up with the Minnesota Vikings for the first 2 years first 3 years that I was in Minnesota, and here was the team record, but these are the reasons why we didn't win. Or I got benched last year, and it was the Minnesota Vikings' fault. It wasn't my fault. You getting benched is not a good look going into free agency. So the better situation is to take your first 2 years, take it for what it is, all the stats that you've collected, you get traded to Titans, Bengals, the Broncos, or whoever the hell else. You ball out there, and then you go into free agency in 2021, and you cash out. You get it. Because, look, teams are starving for quarterbacks. They don't grow on trees, and it is what it is. That's what I would do. Threaten to bench his ass, which would then force Kirk Cousins to have no choice to say, it's a lot better for me to go into free agency playing the previous season before instead of coming off of the bench where there's going to be a lot more questions to be answered. And it may bring my monetary value down. You don't want that. So that's what I would do if I was the Minnesota Vikings to get around that no trade clause. Otherwise, if he still stands pat, and he's like, you know what, I'm sticking with it. Okay, fine. You can ride the bench. We're going to tank 2020 because I put together a campaign poster for the Minnesota Vikings. If Kirk Cousins doesn't succeed, the campaign poster that I put together is, quote, if Kirk can't weather, endeavor for Trevor. Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson, go for him. Tank 2020, go 0-16, and you've got your franchise quarterback of the future. We do this 3 times a week. Mediokr Best Sports Podcast with Realistic Randy. You can check me out on Twitter at realistic_Randy, Facebook at Realistic Randy. You can catch me on my personal YouTube page, Realistic Randy. You can just search Realistic Randy and you'll find it. The next podcast on this channel, Score North, will be on Thursday. We'll see you then.